Hi everyone, delonewolf here and welcome back to EVE Talk, your weekly look at the market in EVE Online. And last week saw the launch of the plex market that now allows you to trade plex in GTA 4.4 through the EVE Online app. Now I don't have it. I spend enough time at home that I can, I think, do everything I need to just straight from my PC. So I'm not really planning to use it, but it could have an interesting impact on the plex market, of course. I'm really curious to see what kind of volumes we're going to see and what it potentially does to the price. Before we get started, we'll take a quick look at the new Eden store. With the anniversary of EVE Online, we do get a couple of new skins. Look at that. Permanent Roadie skin, only 17 plex. That is not a lot. And this skin looks pretty cool. Definitely something unique with more paint like stripes that you see here. I like the black main part of it, so that's pretty cool. And then the Dragon Phoenix skin still available. These are pretty cool as well, but 110 plex, that is quite a bit of a difference. Yeah, these permaband skins pretty cheap, so that is pretty nice. Other than that, we're not really seeing any sales or anything like that going, so that means that we get to move straight to the market. Let's get in here, and as always we're gonna start with some plex and stuff, and that's coming in at 135. So let's dive right into plex, and in GTA we are just below 2.7 million. So from last week we are basically hesitating a little bit in the buyers market. 2.5 million, definitely a narrow margin here. Looks like a bottom is forming. And then if you look at the player owned trade hubs, we get a little bit of competition, but I do think that GTA might just regain a lot of market share when it comes to plex trading because of the mobile app, of course. And then we have the sellers in the trade hubs. Yep, 2.65 million, pretty much a little bit lower than the GTA price, but not by that much anymore. And we definitely have a little bit of dumping, a little bit of selling that was happening in the last hour or so. So that's driving the price back down a little bit. So that's actually a sign of a little bit more pressure. The chart is pretty clear, right? A 1 year decline from almost 4.5 million down to the current level of around 2.7 million on the average prices. And you can see the hesitation here. We're definitely going flat at the tail end. Today's average starts a bit lower though, probably because of that extra selling happening in the trade hub, player owned trade hub, that is. And volume wise, I'm not noticing anything too drastic just yet. Perhaps we'll need a couple of weeks to see what happens there. But the big difference, of course, is that if we go for these buyers especially, you do have a bit more activity in the GTA 4.4 buyers market, where before you would definitely have a domination by the player owned trade hubs for the top, let's say 10-20 buy orders or something like that. Narrowing of the margin and a bit of apparently bottom forming, but we've seen that before, right here just below the 3 million mark. The market thought perhaps here is where we'll form a bottom, even a little bit of buying happening on the volumes here. I also thought this would be a good time to start investing in plex. I never said put all your ISK in plex though. You want to be ready for something like this where we go even lower all of a sudden. So right now, again, from this chart, it looks like a great time to sell plex. But again, keep this one thing in mind. CCP has announced actually a decent while ago, but it's still ongoing, that we are in a resource crunch where they're looking for drought, they're looking for problems, they're looking for making stuff more valuable in the game. And ISK may become a part of that equation. They may make it harder to create ISK in the game as well. That would, of course, mean a decline in price of plex, or continued pressure on plex as well. For the multiple pilot train certificate, it is forced down as well, of course, below the 1.38 billion on the chart. We're currently selling these for 1.5 billion, but the buyers are coming in below 1.3 billion, and apparently there's people that are dumping to these buyers considering the average price that we are seeing at the moment. And outside of GTA, yep, 1.34 billion actually. This is what I was talking about, a real dominance by the Tranquility Trade Tower in the multiple pilot train certificates. where they have the top orders, the cheapest sell orders, and also definitely have most of the top buy orders. Just one of them here in Cheetah, but everything else is in the Tranquility Trade Tower. That dynamic is definitely gonna change in the Plex market. And sounds like the neighbors are vacuuming a little bit. I hope it doesn't come through too much, but I'm gonna try to push through all of that. Here is the skill extractor market next, landing on the 300 million mark. We see that same hesitation, that same bottom forming, but yeah, here a first sign that this might not be the end for Plex. 297 million for the sellers, 291 for the buyers. We do have that narrow margin, but we also have sellers that have gone below the 300 million mark. In fact, in the last 24 hours, I think, yeah, we're going down from 304 million down to 297. That is definitely putting more pressure on the skill extractor price. And if this is the case, who knows, Plex might be in for another decline as well. So we're seeing signs that the market does want to bottom out, but we are still also seeing signs that it may be another false bottom, just like the 350 million mark that we had seen here before in skill extractors and the 3 million mark for Plex. So be careful when you do your buying. After that, we get the injector markets. Here is the large skill injector market, and eventually we did have a much slower decline in price than the Plex market itself. So there was a little bit of speculation that SP might be, remaining or regaining some extra worth, but to no avail. Here we definitely have a bit of a rush down in the last couple of days to 750 million ISK, 761 for the sellers and 723 for the buyers. Here the big difference, of course, is that we have this margin that's actually opened up pretty significantly. Again, Perimeter Trade Tower definitely taking this trade, or at least the cheapest sellers and the highest buyers for its market share, but a much more sizable margin between sellers and buyers as well, indicating again that the pressure may still not be over. For the small scale injectors, we are finally seeing a more uniform chart that follows the large scale injectors a little bit more. We're basically landing on the 160 million mark. It's in fact going straight through that, 154 million for the sellers, 44 million for the buyers. Maybe a bit less margin, but I think if you scale it up to the large injector market prices, it's pretty similar. So again, showing sign that there is more pressure in the market as well. Now here, of course, you could say, well, it's pretty normal because Plex is declining in price, so should the skill injectors. After all, the skill extractors are a part of the mix. It could also be that, well, we get skillers in the abyss and things like that, that players also speculate that SP may again drop in value a little bit in the market, because it is actually decently easy right now to get them. Oh yeah, the anniversary event also drops boosters, so that means that we do get to gain SP at a higher rate. So do the SP farms, which again could be a sign that we'll see further declines in the need for skill injectors. Finally, we've got the daily alpha injectors that are not going against the trend here. In fact, accelerating as well, down to less than 35 million ISK. We're talking 36 million for the sellers, but 32 million for the buyers. Still a 10% margin pretty much between sellers and buyers, and a bit more pressure. Although here, again, slight difference, right? Cheetah also in the top sell orders, or the cheapest sell orders. Cheetah also showing up in those buy orders. It's definitely a different market, a different segment, only for alpha players. You can trade in it as an omega, but the consumers of this daily alpha injector are, of course, only the alpha clones. Of that, we've got the hypercores that are, well, stemming the bleeding here, although they are now below 300,000 ISK on the average price. 290,000 for the sellers, 272 for the buyers. Could just be following the Plex trend right now. I'm not gonna say that Hypernet is a complete bust. We're still seeing quite a bit of a Hypernet activity in Cheetah local for that. Let's move on to the minerals. You may already have seen from the ticker that things are interesting there as well. 930 for minerals. like that. And what's interesting, well, Titanium is actually stemming its decline as well. Went to a very high point of 10 ISK, of course, very quickly on the announcement of the resource problems that CCP was going to create in the game. After that, well, people found their way, I think, towards high-sec mining, mining maybe in wormhole space and things like that. Some Titanium sources were becoming or were put online by the players, causing like a little bit more supply and a decline in the price, but we're well away from that 5-6 ISK that we had before the announcement. We're still above 8 ISK, which even historically is a good price. And then if we go for GTA, we're actually up to 870 for the sellers, which is up a little bit from last week. 825 for the buyers. They're still trying to get that narrower margin, but it's very difficult to do. The supplies just aren't there. We can see that normally from these volumes. Yeah, look at that, 73 million, 175 million. You have to go up to 876 to find a 1.1 billion unit sell orders. Before this, on these really cheap prices, sell orders of 2 and 4 and even 5 billion units were actually pretty commonplace on this market. So this is a very big difference, and here we're basically stopping the recovery, and we may be up for a small uptrend. We'll have to see what the rest of the market does to maybe gauge the chances of that. Definitely an attempt here by Pyrite to get back to 8 ISK has been stopped, I think, in the last couple of days. We're talking 777 for the sellers, 740 for the buyers. So we tried. We can also see that once we do get to those really high prices, here it is, the dumping of some reserves does still happen. 2 billion units here are waiting at 793. That means that we can sometimes shoot up to that 793 range, but after that any new supply is bound to constantly bounce on these 8 billion units of Pyrite. Pyrite and Isogen especially, I think, will be suffering from that for a while. We're massively overproduced or underconsumed, you could say. It really depends on your viewpoint on that. And as a result, I expect that there are still really big stocks waiting out there for a sell opportunity. On the Mexilon market front, we are back on seeing the effect of the drought, you could say. I think here we should also keep in mind that activity is up in the game, so consumption is bound to be up as well. And now we're starting to see that slow trend where it's very hard to produce enough for all the players in the game. I think that this is an interesting place to be. We haven't seen that before, but if you read the article on the EVE Online website, I skimmed through it from CCP Helmar. He did say that, well, we're seeing increased activity. We're seeing old players come back. We're seeing lots of new players that are actually having longer first sessions, and so hopefully they can keep a lot of these players as well, because more activity, I think, is always great for the game. But of course, they're coming into the game in a time of drought, which has advantages and disadvantages for the players that do actually enjoy the more PvE industrial aspect of the sandbox. I think they're gonna have a great time, because of course mining in high-sec actually has a lot of value compared to 6 months ago. They'll feel decently well rewarded for their efforts in the game. On top of that, CCP Hilmar in his article put the bot efforts at 90% reduction to the volume, to the impact on the economy from bots. Lots of people are speculating that this is also the reason why the DDoS attacks keep happening. I would say we're gonna have to see this as another sign that CCP is actually pretty successful at the moment in their fight against bots. We hope that they can keep these efforts going, but you can see the result of this in the sense that mining actually has value once again, even for smaller, newer players that mine in high-sec and that enjoy that aspect of the game. The drawback is, of course, that losses start to become more meaningful, and for newer players that can be a bit of an extra barrier of entry, of course. Before all of this, when we had Mixlon at 40 ISK, I can imagine that throwing away a couple of cruisers was not that big a deal. We saw my video on the impact of the mineral crunch on the Tech 1 ships. It's definitely higher prices, which also means that that stings a little bit more, but that's the whole idea of EVE Online, of course. So Mixlon is actually up on a 1-year high point, 77 ISK almost for the sellers, 69 ISK for the buyers. You can see that these are being driven up here, and that the supplies 8 million, 13 million, 13 14 million. We're not talking the hundreds of millions of units that we regularly saw before all of this. For Isogen, we might expect a different story, and here it is. We are staying below 20 ISK on the average price, 1950 for the sellers and 1890 for the buyers. And the reason is, despite the fact that it's actually far less commonplace to have Isogen than Mexelon or any of the previous ones, it should be harder to produce this stuff per cubic meter. You still have 90 million units, 112 million units, and this is the same story as pyrite, but then actually, in my opinion, the worst in the bunch. Isogen was really the biggest victim of this time of plentiful. It was just so easy to gather compared to its need in the economy, that it went down to 12.5 ISK, something that used to be worth like 150 ISK. Compare that to Mexelon, that this is in its normal price range. So this really is the one that I think will take the longest to recover, the longest to show this maybe this slow uptrend on increased activity as well. Here we're stemming the tide in titanium. I think we might be getting there to a point where CCP will actually start to see some of these stocks deplete, and that we're basically getting these higher prices on just what are people mining, what are people producing, and what are people destroying, which is of course the whole goal of what they've been doing here. For Noxium, we're continuing to hover in the 300 to 350 band, 324 for the sellers, 300 ISK for the first buyer. Noxium, I feel, is always a little bit different. It's got like one leg in HiSec, one leg in wormhole space, one leg in nullsec. You can basically get it from anywhere, and so it's very hard to say that it's being impacted by the same things as, let's say, titanium, which right now has declined because it's mostly, I think, being impacted by mining that's happening in HiSec. Here you can have so many different sources that it's basically, in my opinion, going to always be a bit of a more stable one that does its own thing with the price. After that, and the ranges, 300 ISK plus, so we're still paying a premium from the real bottom here in October, November, December, but we're not paying a massive premium. Compare that to titanium, that went from 5 ISK to 8 ISK. That's definitely a much bigger premium here. And then we've got our former nullsec minerals, which are basically back to nullsec minerals, because you can't really get them from your moons in HiSec anymore, I don't think. And look at that resurgence. Here is a Zydrine chart up above 800 ISK and able to stay there, 820 for the sellers and 809 for the buyers. But then something that, well, I wasn't really predicting that, but I did point this out in a couple of my previous EVE talks. Normally, historically, Zydrine was always less expensive than Megasite, and we had this inversion happening with Megasite staying on that 550, 500 range, and now we are for the first time seeing a real response here for the Megasite market. We're going straight up through the 600 ISK mark, and that is because the sellers are now up to 660 ISK, buyers have been forced up to 575, and this could just be the beginning, of course, if the old historic patterns are resurging, because we are back to basically getting Megasite only from wormhole space, lowsec and nullsec, and back from the previous sources, not really being able to, oh, that's a good moon with lots of Megasite, I'm gonna grab that, for instance. Then we could be in for a further increase in price in Megasite, because it should be less plentiful than Zydrine per cubic meter mined, generally speaking. So this is a big difference here, while Zydrine is plateauing at 800 ISK, which I think is back to a more normal range for Zydrine. Don't think it's yet at its average prices, historically speaking, but it's definitely a very impressive comeback over the course of a couple of months. And then Megasite is just, in my opinion, starting that movement now, and still has a ways to go, despite going from 400 to 600 ISK here as well. Very interesting to see this increase. Is it on the screen at this point? Let me check. No, not yet, but its percentage increase is quite impressive, so keep keep an eye out for that on the ticker. And then finally we'll end up here with Morphite, that is continuing to bounce up from that 17.5k on the charts for the third time at this point. We're up to 18,400 disc for the sellers, and buyers are actually coming in at 18,100. That one is still very expensive as well, a little bit different from all the other minerals because it is tied to the Tech 2 economy, and there is 20% increase in the sell price of Megasite here. That is pretty impressive for a 1 week move, of course. Next up, the PI market coming in at 1940. Let's take a look at that one. Not sure if this was aimed at Eve Talk, but there was one comment that said that I tend to skim over PI a little bit. I think I still try to do a fair analysis of it. Of course, PI is a little bit different from all the rest of the stuff because it's a far more passive activity, which also has many abilities to scale it up. Just get another character, give him the PI skills that is needed, and you can get another 5 planets, or is it 6 planets? Not even sure at this point. I think it's 6 planets. If you want, you can also have just planets that focus on the low-end resources, and then planets that focus on producing the high-end stuff, and then start to move things around. You can make it as passive or as active as you want. It is definitely a unique market, which in the last couple of months has basically been struggling with overproduction compared to the demand. This could of course switch a little bit when with the increased player activity that we are seeing in the game. And one thing that is true, but I don't fully know all of it myself, is that PI is needed in many segments of the economy. So the ones that I'm personally most familiar with is that a part of PI is needed for fuel production, which in my opinion has very constant demand and tends to be a little bit stronger in times of low demand or high production, such as the ones that we're in right now. I know of course that there is a big part of PI that also goes to structures, which is going to be struggling naturally at the moment, although we're seeing more destruction. I think or there's more destruction on the horizon, of course, with the May update. I also think that lower activity with the changes to moon mining or the mineral mix there, and of course the increased chance of losing those structures, that we might just see a lowering of the production there. On the other hand, with a lot of destruction, we might also see an increase in production. So that is more speculation. And then there's lots of stuff that I don't exactly know where they end up into the EVE economy, whether it's, I don't know, ships, goods. I have to admit that I don't know all of the cycles that PI are used in, but I think it's always a very interesting segment to go over, even if I don't have all the information all the time. So let's get started. Here are the broadcast nodes. Went to less than 2 million on average, are bouncing back up a little bit from that, but we're still at 2 million for the sellers, 1.94 million for the buyers, slightly below average basically for the broadcast nodes. Usually you can get 2 million and up for the sellers. At least right now we're struggling a little bit, as I've said. The advanced PI materials is definitely needed in a lot of structure production, and I think right now we're expecting a bit of a hit on that. Construction blocks are finally going back up after really struggling through the fall and the spring months. I'm gonna say not exactly super accurate here. A little bit of a resurgence in winter back to that 11,000 average, but really we've been struggling in the last couple of months due to low demand. And here we might see the first sign that increased activity will finally translate in a little bit more demand in all of this stuff as well. 10,500 for the sellers and 9,200 for the buyers is better. It is definitely not on the average price yet. Consumer electronics not showing that same signal. You can clearly see here that the struggle started. 12,500 actually historically, as far as I know, has been the average price for consumer electronics. You can see in the fall we went to 11,000, and then here after winter we just crashed down to less than 10k. We're at 10,000 for the sellers, 8,400 for the buyers, again showing that lack of demand causing the prices to be very low at the moment. Coolants tied to fuels, I know that because I produced this myself. Far more Stable 11 to 12,000 disc. We're actually slightly above average right now with 12,400 for the sellers, almost 11,000 for the buyers. This is what I like about it. It's about PI. It's got these different segments and they tend to behave differently. Coolant's actually really good for a constant passive income. It's also very easy to produce coolants for gas planets. Once you go to stuff like advanced PI materials, you'll need stuff from different planets and things like that, and it becomes far less passive, of course. Cryoprotectant solutions next, landing on 150,000 disc, 160 for the sellers, 140 for the buyers. You all know what this, if you follow Eve Talk at least, you know what this spike here is, and these increasing prices away from the 100,000 disc. It's all the new implants that is being introduced in the game in the last couple of months. They required cryoprotectant solutions to produce, and so we got this nice boom. We're still paying a pretty big 50% premium on the chart here from 100,000 to 150,000 over the last year. If CCP were to come out with another set, I'm not sure if there's any on the horizon or expected. You can expect some more volatility here as well. Otherwise, probably a slow burn down to an average price can be expected. Enriched uranium tied to fuels, actually showing that not all fuel-related PI materials are doing that well, but you can also see that months of September, October, we're actually still able to get that 14K average. We dipped a little bit below that in the winter, actually came back in February. It's only here at the tail end that we were not able to maintain that price range, and yet it's almost 13,000 for the sellers. It's 12,800 and 12,000 for the buyers. We're actually probably going to go back up here a little bit, and we're not at the average, but it's definitely not as bad as the consumer electronics, for instance. On the integrity response drones market, we're continuing to stay below average. Advanced PI, so tied to structures, fully expected 2.2 million for the sellers, less than 2 million for the buyers. I think people that do grab them from at that price range, 2 million and below, which they do from time to time, you can see that on these daily averages, are actually having a really good deal if or when CCP comes out with another structure announcement. And we know that there's stuff in the works there for like 00 local related, perhaps, right? They did their blackout experiment. They found out that's maybe a little bit too much, but a structure might just become the answer there if they want a more balanced approach. Now, it's not on their roadmap right now as far as we know, but it doesn't mean that CCP isn't looking into that and perhaps slowly developing that feature as well. So I think that people that are buying these dips are doing pretty well. For the longer term, of course, not short term. Mechanical parts are struggling as well a little bit, but able to stay above 10,000 disc. In fact, 10,500 disc for the sellers. It's not bad for something that is so easily produced on very common barren planets. That is not bad, and the first buyers coming in above 10,000 as well should help with keeping this closer to the average than some of the others. Organic mortar applicators, first real trend break, 1 year low point, I'm gonna say, on the 5-day moving average right here. We are talking less than 1 million for the sellers. That's a bit of dumping, 950,000 for the buyers. This is one of those dips where you're buying at like the 950 range. Look at this 1 year chart, that is pretty low. Would make sense to try a buy order at this point. For robotics, this is the one fuel related PI material that is a bit different, of course. Specialized, can still be produced on a single planet. If I'm not mistaken, plasma planets can do it, but it's of course a lot harder to do, and it's a tier up from the coolants, from the mechanical parts. And right here, what I'm seeing is that we are clearly struggling. 100,000 disc is its normal average. Right now, we're talking less than 90,000 for the sellers, 85,000 for the buyers. At least we're stopping the bleeding, but it's obviously a pretty low price. Self-harmonizing power cores also struggling, staying at the 1.9 million range. In fact, below that for the sellers, just above 1.8 million for the buyers. Not really a 1 year low point. We'd have to see buyers below 1.8 for that, but it is definitely pretty cheap at the moment. For the superconductors, this was the one exception, and here maybe that is what that comment was about. I couldn't tell you what the destination of superconductors is. I don't really know what exactly it's being used in, but I produce it, and I managed to sell a lot of stuff on this high point up to 15,000 disk. Right now we are going back down, and we're maybe overshooting a little bit in supply. 11,000 for the sellers and 10,000 for the buyers. A normal average on this 1 year chart, you would say 11,500, maybe even 12,000 disk should have been possible. So this does feel like we have been oversupplying the superconductor bubble a little bit. Test cultures had this bubble as well, so I'm gonna assume that both of these, whatever they're used in, are the same. If you know, definitely feel free to put that in the comments. Always willing to learn, of course. But right now we're also in that dumping phase, and apparently that over dumping phase as well. Sellers are definitely going below 10,000 disk all of a sudden, and the buyers have lowered their buy prices to 7,150. So that's a lot more pressure on test cultures as well. And finally, with where mainframes, again, advanced PI that is coming in at 2.1 million for the sellers and just below 2.1 million for the buyers. Not a great deal, but definitely trading at the lower end of its average as well. So that's the PI. Sometimes people also ask, why don't I cover all the PI materials? The list is just too long. It would make EVE Talk a little bit too long. So I'm gonna drink a little bit and then we'll move on to the advanced materials, if I can find the bottle. And that's 3015, like that. And let's get started here. Also another one that here I don't know all of the production details. I'm starting to understand that it's used in Tech 2 ships and how it's got their own, every race has their own basically cycle or full production line, you could say, but it also involves stuff in low null, which I don't do. So as a result, I don't have all the information. I can just try and gauge trends, specifically large wars in 0.0, which we haven't seen in a very long time, can be very profitable in this segment. So let's get started. Crystalline carbonite. All right, trying to get back to that 160 range, almost there for the sellers, so above average, not that bad. That this volatility is decreasing, unfortunately, but there were definitely some opportunities in the last couple of months. Ferrite carbide is staying at the 150 range, I'm gonna say. Yep, 149 for the sellers, 148 for the first one, actually. A bit of pressure, but still staying around average. That's not that bad. Titanium carbide is, well, definitely below average on its 1 year chart. Keep one thing in mind, its average is 175, which is higher than the previous two. 170 for the sellers, 155 for the buyers. I think that this is actually still a reasonable price as well. We're definitely not playing with 1 year low points. And then tungsten carbide has a surprise jump up, apparently went to 275 on a day. It's still at 252 for the sellers, 209 for the buyers. Very nice, of course. If you did buy below 175, which you could have a couple of months ago, you have a very nice surprise sell opportunity. Couldn't give you guys the reason for this one, but if you happen to have some tungsten carbide lying around, and I'm gonna take a quick look at my ticker, I do not, then great time to try and sell, of course. On the metamaterials fronts, we have the photonic metamaterials that are landing on that 17,500 range. 18,000 for the sellers, 17,750 for the buyers, slightly above average, I'm gonna say. Not a bad price. Plasmonic metamaterials were declining, but are actually going back up to slightly above average price. 24,000 for the sellers, 22,500 for the buyers. Again, not bad. This is a reasonable price. I wouldn't be investing massively in this or dumping everything that I have. This feels decently healthy. Non-linear metamaterials also trending up a little bit. Yearly average 25,000, so almost there, right? 25,000 almost for the sellers, 23,000 for the buyers. You do clearly notice that we don't have that much supply here, but this again makes for a reasonable in the middle of the road price, which is okay to be producing, not really there for speculation just yet. Terahertz metamaterials, alright, this one was a little bit different. We clearly noticed this break in the fall and the winter as well. Went down to like 18,000 disc, which is very low for the good 25,000 first half of the year average. Finally, we're jumping back up here a little bit, 24,400 for the sellers, 22,000 for the buyers. Okay, basically a recovery here as well to a more normal average price. So this does mean that for take-to-ship production, we might be also out of the plentiful times, and hopefully we'll see some real volatility there. There's still some other goods that I want to check. Here is fermionic condensates actually dipping down to a low point here, 86,000 for the sellers, but 76,000 for two buyers, and now we're down to 53. Clearly a lack of demand. If you can get rid of these two buy orders, you do have an interesting opportunity to grab some very cheap fermionic condensates potentially. Won't be easy to do. Ferrogel staying at the 40,000 mark. Struggling a little bit, but at least it's not declining further. Fullerites, alright, another surprise spike. Sometimes you expect a category to be very average, and now we have a second good here, Fullerites, that jumped up. Was doing really well actually here in the last couple of months, pulling away from the 1000 ISK mark, and now all of a sudden we jumped up to almost 1500 ISK for the sellers, almost 1300 for the buyers. If you invested in the first half of the year, I'm gonna say below 1000 ISK, you can now sell at almost a 50% profit. Hypersynaptic fibers. Here we have a bit of speculation happening, I think. We went to 10,000, we went back up to almost 14,000 ISK, and now we're being oversupplied again, back down to 10,500 for the sellers, still 9,800 for the buyer, so I wouldn't say the bottom has dropped out of demand just yet, but you're definitely buying below the chart there. Nano transistors, basically back at the 6,000 range. Yep, 6,000 for the sellers, 5,500 for the buyers. Not much to say except that we started the year a lot lower, but it's apparently 6,000 for nano transistors at the moment. Phenolic composites also flattening out on the 2,000 mark, which is right around its average. And then we've got the ceramic fibers that was struggling a little bit and is still doing so. 350 at the low end, 318 for the buyers. And that is the one exception. Honestly, if you want to make an investment, but keep in mind that the rest is not like massively spiking or anything like that. I'm not seeing a great resurgence, but if you want to buy below the entire chart, 324, the buyers of ceramic fibers does feel pretty cheap. Across the board here though, not exactly the place where I would put a lot of ISK into, expecting massive rises. Take two ships next, coming in at 36.30. Hopefully we can see some action there. Do I still have anything? Ticker. No, I still have that Heretic. I tried to buy... Oh, I bought, in fact, that Loki. And I'm not sure about my Manticores. I'm trying to grab those at 25 million. Let's get started. Here is the Ares, staying above 30 million ISK here. Just below that, in fact, for the sellers, and 26 million for the buyers. 370 of them is a lot. That should definitely keep us from going any higher, but unfortunately right now we're still above 30 million on the chart, so I would say that this is not the right time to be making moves on the Ares. Next up we've got the Basilisk that's climbing above 230 million here, 237 for the sellers, 211 for the buyers. Again, a very reasonable price, slightly above average in fact on the seller side. 211 for the buyers, that is definitely not where you want to try to grab a Basilisk. I think in my trades made, I've got my latest one, bought for 175, sold at 229. So you can see the potential here is for the ships to go much lower. Unfortunately, we'll have to keep a close eye and really hunt for those bargains, I think, because if Advanced Moon Materials is an indication, we're in a slightly higher price range, higher production cost range right now, so I don't expect too massive dumping. Things like here in the Ares though, with 370 of them, could be what we need to get that going, but it's not going to be that easy. Here in the Basilisk, we're not seeing numbers that would indicate that we're going to crash by oversupply. The Cerberus went up to 280 million here as well, on its way back down a little bit. That is normal, of course. Those prices do create some extra supply. Almost 270 for the sellers, 245 for the buyers. Yeah, this again, if I look at my trades made and I grab the Cerberus, 195 bought, 260 sold. You can clearly see that this is not the right time to be buying these ships. On the Crow, we are, alright, finally going down to a less than 30 million range on the chart. 29.4 for the sellers, and we still have 400 of them coming in below 30 million. 21.2 million for the buyers. Let's try and get that to show up on the chart. 21, yeah, that's down here. So this feels like the first one where I would say, okay, it's gonna be a little bit harder, I think, for the Crow itself. 100 traded a day, well, that's actually reasonable. Yeah, if you want, try to grab a crow as close to that 21.2 million range as possible, and yeah, your high potential 40 million, 35 million should definitely be possible. Interesting to see these buyers basically drop out of the markets. The Guardian is more in line with what we saw before, back slightly above average, definitely above 230 on the average price, 237 for the sellers, 216 for the buyers. Again, not really where I'm looking to invest. I think a Guardian trade should be in here. No, because I was still trying to buy one, if I'm not mistaken. Look at what I'm trying to buy at. 184 was actually the lowest buy price at one point. 216, we obviously still have a ways to go. The Hawk had this lovely volatility, which we now know is mostly tied to events. Stuff like the Skillers in the Abyss increased the popularity all of a sudden. If you have things for frigates, destroyer class ships in PvE, Hawks are super popular. And so these were two opportunities where, well, I didn't really take part in that, except that I had bought one Hawk at some point. Couldn't even tell you guys the price anymore. Just to try it in the Abyss, I think, with my brother, and as a result I did manage one sale in here somewhere. But let's keep this pattern in mind, right? We're still at 38 million for the sellers and 33 million for the buyers. 33 million for the buyers is actually reasonable, but the closer to 30 the more of a sure thing we have. And yeah, those PvE activities that CCP introduces very regularly at this point can have or can create very big opportunities in the Hawk market. So stocking up at the right time and then selling during the right events could be very, very profitable here. On the Heretic front, we're continuing to struggle. Less than 60 million for the sellers, 54 million for the buyers. That's actually not the bottom. I bought one at 52 million. And the Hound, that is interesting. We went up to above 35 million, 37 million on the average price. Now we are going down, and let's hope that we still see reasonable volumes. But that's okay, 32 and 40 here, 27.6 million for the sellers and below 25 million for the buyers. There's already quite a bit of activity going on when it comes to trying to buy below 25 million. But if we look at this chart, this is also a slight sell opportunity that, in my opinion, is far more tradable than the Hawk and the Crow. The stealth bombers do tend to move a little bit more quickly in my personal experience. Hound below 25 million, that does start to look pretty interesting. I would say, considering that we're not seeing hundreds more Hounds coming to the market, that it would make sense to try and get in at this point on this decline here. The Ishtar, a bit of a different story, of course. One of my favorite ships in the game, incredible PvE drone platform, super versatile, which is why I love it, which is also why it's able to mostly command a 230 to 250 million range price most of the time, and is far more stable than some of the PvP platforms. 240 million for the sellers, 232 for the buyers. You can see pretty narrow margin, decent supply, 100 a day for a heavy assault cruiser, definitely not bad. I'm not saying that this is not a PvP platform, it's just that because let's say that you're much less likely to use a Hound in PvP it's got this volatility, the Ishtar far more stable because it does have this PvE use, of course. Then the Manticore went down to, let's take a look at that, 26.5 million. That's bad news for me because I am trying to buy these for 25 million. Let's see what we are doing. 31.6 million already for the sellers, up to 27 million for the buyers, and this is gonna be my orders. I think I set them up, at least some of them, during the last video there. So yeah, doesn't look like we're gonna buy them now, and who knows how this uptrend is going to work out. I may have just been too late to try the Manticore trade, but I do always try to look at these previous ranges before I set up my buy orders, so probably a little bit too late on that one. The Munin is dropping off, but look at the trade volumes. That is not great news. 223 for the sellers, 210 for the buyers. If you want to try a Munin trade, 210, it's not even the bottom of this 1-year chart. It is pretty low, that is true, and definitely a year ago was a trigger for an increased price. You could try it, but I would never really risk this with more than one ship, to be honest. Then we've got the Nemesis, double spikes above 30 million, landing on 25 million. Where are those buyers at? That's the bad news here. 27.5 for the sellers, decent volumes, but nothing that's gonna crash the price too much. 24.5 for the buyers, that's still a little bit high. Quite a bit of competition here. If we'd gone to that 23 million, it would start to be a bit more interesting. Below that, close to 21. Would have been awesome, but nope, we don't see that drop off just yet. I think, yeah, Advanced Moon Materials back on those averages is keeping that from happening. Oneros staying well above 200 million as well here, 214 for the sellers, 192 for the buyers. Definitely not the time to jump in. And then the Purifiers also doing its wavy move, getting back above 30 million at 33 for the sellers and 27 for the buyers. Not a place to buy at. And the bad news is, right, 25 million. You'd love to see that as a clear buy opportunity. We bounced off of a 28.5 million average price. So here, clearly, we're not reaching those bottoms. We're not so oversupplied that happens. Volume-wise, 89 here, but other than that, nothing to report. Saber continuing to decline as well. That's interesting. Today's average price below 62.5, 63 for the sellers, 57 million for the buyers. You could try it, but the spikes are very difficult to actually get going. So I don't know. Maybe a Saber if you really want to also be ready for the interdictor gamble, which is why I have a Heretic at 52 million. I'm still gambling that CCP might intervene in this ship. Who knows, I may be completely wrong on that. 57 million is pretty low for a Saber, potential 70 million, etc. But I feel like it's very difficult to trade on these high points in the interdictors, unfortunately. Scimitar working its way above 230 on the sellers. Yep, 241 for the sellers, 200 million for the buyers. So again, not something you want to jump in on. If you can sell them for a good profit, you should definitely do so. And the Zarmast is recovering back down a little bit. Staying above 300, yeah, 330 for the sellers, 300 million for the buyers. Pretty normal chart, I'm gonna say, for a Triglavian ship here. I'm not expecting that much volatility here just yet, but it's something we're keeping an eye on with the Zarmast, of course. So the Tech 2 ship market, yeah, I think that basically what you want to see is stuff like this, and then hopefully you can find a real buy opportunity. But right now we're definitely not reaching those bottoms that we have seen in the last 6 months or so. Probably because of the higher price in Advanced Moon Materials. Moving on to the Tech 3 ships, that's coming in at 47.20. Here, of course, we had that weird story where the Confessor, for instance, spiked up to 70 million ISK. We're recovering from that finally, but we're staying well above 40 million on the average price. 47 for the sellers and 33.6 million for the buyers. Okay, first time that we're seeing definitely a bit of a margin opening up here, showing a bit of a lack of demand and maybe some oversupply. 33 million for the buyers is quite reasonable. Then the question is, do you expect a potential dry up and another big wave of purchases or volatility in this tactically short market or not? That's the gamble that you're taking here. Very big margin between buyers and sellers. Supply wise, this is definitely not crazy. Two sell orders in the last 24 hours, only 9 ships, nothing above 10. That does feel like it could happen very quickly, right? 100 confessors. There we go, price goes parabolic, and then a purchase at 33 million would be golden, but we'll have to see. Let's first take a look at the rest of them. One of the main reasons why we don't see any supply in the confessor was, of course, that the Hecate was still going to 90 million ISK. We're now going back down from that, but we're still at 61 million for the sellers, 51 million for the buyers, and you can see in the last 24 hours, this is of course where the supply goes, where production goes, where competition goes. This is also where demand is, 51 million and 43 million for most buyers. Quite a bit of a premium compared to the confessor. But the worrying bit for me personally is that we're not seeing 50, 100, etc. here in the Hecate to continue to crash the price down. So it looks to me like industry might just not have what it takes. The reserves were not there to fully recover from this spike and now this spike, and as a result we might not see lower average 40 million prices across the board anytime soon. But will we see volatility? That's the gamble, of course. The Jackdaw is staying at 50 million. That one is basically agreeing with me in the sense that we're not gonna see 40 million anytime soon. 53 million for the sellers, 44 million for the buyers, and supply-wise, half a page, 10, 10, 13. This is all pretty reasonable, especially considering this higher price. So overall, this to me would indicate that Confessor buying at 33.6 million makes a lot of sense to try. After that, we still have the Zwepel to look at. That's also staying well away from that 40 million range, currently at 45 million for the sellers, 38 million for the buyers. Yeah, a Confessor going below the Zwepel in buy price is kind of weird. This is an anomaly. I wouldn't try to buy a dozen or 100 confessors, but 1 or 2, that would make sense in my book, especially compared to the prices that all the other ships are still trying to sell at, and then the supplies that aren't outlandish, aren't going to crash the prices down. This is a full page of, almost a full page of Zwepels, but 13 and 10, everything else very reasonable in price. When it comes to the cruisers, the Legion, you may have seen that before. I bought one for 135. Now, I got a little bit of patience for a better price right now, but let's see where we're at. 148.5 for the sellers, 133 for the buyers. You can still try to match my buy order. Let's hope that we get another wave up. We've got 2 in the last year. Let's see if we can get a third one. I'm not gonna buy a lot of these ships, but because I feel like this market can be manipulated very easily. But these are opportunities, of course, that we should try to take advantage of, I think. Slowly, methodically, very carefully, but hopefully it'll work out. I'm actually trying to buy that, or do I have it? Yeah, I got a Loki for 150 million as well. On this decline, I said we gotta gamble sometimes. Now we're at 170 for the sellers, 153 for the buyers. I'm not sure if I've got my order. Nope, it could still be right here, but I put it on the ticker, so I think I have it. I'm not exactly sure, I'll have to check. But here again, massive decline. Definitely bottoming out here, so trying to buy here would make sense, but I would never do so with multiple ships. The Proteus also declined from that 180 high point, but not reaching its 130 bottom. 152 for the sellers, 140 for the first buyer, 10 ships on top of that. That feels very aggressive. Okay, not what I would do, but you can see that that's what's happening here. And then the Tengu is landing on the 180 million average price range, 182 for the sellers, 167 for the buyers. Definitely not a low point yet either. So across the board, in fact, now for the Tech 3 ship market, I'm seeing basically not a lot of ships on the seller side of things. Hecate is a little bit more, but even that for this price range, For a destroyer, that is kind of crazy. These are actually pretty low numbers, and so all of these are ripe for potential manipulation, for lots of volatility, and then the one that really jumps out here is the Confessor, of course, at 33.6 million for the buyers. That should be a good deal pretty much no matter what happens. And then I bought my Legion, and I think I bought my Loki at 150 as well, just to potentially ride one of these waves, but I'm pretty conservative when it comes to how much of this I buy, because, well, especially in the cruiser market, just a couple dozen ships could crash prices to unseen levels, in my opinion, very quickly. So we gotta be careful in this Tech 3 market, and we definitely don't have that predictability, that normal market dynamic in the destroyers at the moment. Stuff is still trying to recover from this massive Confessor spike and from this massive Hecate spike, which we're still trying. And here in February also 70 million for the Jackdaws. So these definitely have thrown a wrench in all of the regular predictable tactical destroyer market mechanics, but it's still pretty interesting, and yeah, we're gonna try to take advantage of some of these opportunities at least. That leaves us with an extra product coming in at 54 minutes. And this is actually a request from a viewer. He wanted me to take a look at some of the Triglavian materials. So I wrote this down actually, if I can. I think there's both components. Or is it all in materials? Let's see here. I know that there will be Abyss stuff. Let's try. Nope, doesn't show up like that. I'm gonna have to look for it a little bit. I'm not too familiar with it, but there we go. It's Abyss materials. It's only 2 of them. So we've got the crystalline isogen. Obviously relatively new, right? The Abyss is not that old when it comes to EVE Online content, and so now we have very plentiful supplies. We're at a 1-year low point, and we are landing at around 52,000 ISK for the sellers, 52,860 in fact, and 52,850 for the buyers. So here we have basically what looks like a terrible chart, but remember that we are coming from basically an introduction of this content in the game. This is just potentially where CCP wants the price to be for having affordable Triglavian ships and modules and things like that. So crystalline oxygen looks kind of terrible, but at least it's stable above 50,000 ISK. Hopefully this will now be its price range from which we can have more regular market dynamics. On the 0-point condensates, we actually see a far more interesting chart. So right off the bat we went 200,000 ISK, we actually went up to 130, back down to 75, and right now we're slightly below average. 98,000 for the sellers, 91,000 for the buyers. 100,000 does seem to be an average that can be reached by 0-point condensates, and so here really interesting that this has apparently already reached that dynamic phase where supply and demand can actually have dictation on the price, and not just, you know, we still have to find our price range. And of course, whoever came with crystalline isogen 10 on his very first Abyss run tried to get a ridiculous price for it. Here on 0-point condensates, we're far more reasonable, far more quickly. And I know that there's another category, so let's see if I can find it. Is it faction materials? No. God damn it. Trig advanced comp is what I've written down. So let's see if I can find it this way then. Triglavian advanced composites or something like that. No. So then I'm gonna have to look. Is it in components? Advanced components. There we go. Triglavian. That's what I was looking for. Okay, let's go. Capital Singularity Radiation Converter. Never seen one of those myself. Obviously the capital stuff is probably going to be used exclusively in the production of the Dreadnought. You can also see that this chart is only since December, so the introduction of that Dreadnought. And here we have exactly what I was talking about, right? We start at 25 million a unit, then we go down to 20 million a unit a month later, and you clearly have this downtrend and this decrease in volatility as the market finally finds itself. Currently, we are talking 3.2 million for the sellers, 2.1 million for the buyers. Definitely not a lot of buyers in this market just yet. So I would say expect this slow pull away from 5 million to, for now, continue. I don't think, especially in something like a capital ship market, that this is going to stop anytime soon. That we'll just see more supply coming to those markets, and eventually we need buyers to really pick up the pace at some point to create potentially price volatility. But for now, I fully expect this to continue to decline, and I expect to see something similar in the other capital goods. Here is the trinary state processor. Actually started far more reasonable here, 25 million, and we're still at that price range. 26 million for the sellers, 18 million for the buyers though. So if supplies can finally find their way to this market, let's take a quick look at player owned trade ups, nothing. If supplies can find their route a little bit more consistently, which I think still needs to be built up here, you can also clearly see the slow decline away from 25 million is starting here as well. I fully expect more pressure on this price later down the line. Capital 0 points, same pattern, right? Went up to 180 million ISK. Yeah. As you can see, introduction, be the first one on the market. You can try to ask some crazy prices. Volumes though are kind of terrible. And then here we're slowly pulling away since April, basically from the 25 million mark. We're at 16.7 million for the sellers, 14 million for the buyers. This is obviously still a small and new market here, considering the volumes. Now this stuff after that should be a bit more reasonable and plentiful. Let's see if we can get a full chart here. But it shows that very same pattern, in my opinion, right? You've got introduction, went up to a million ISK, then here 250,000 ISK. We were hovering around that a little bit, but eventually supply demands finds itself, and now we're in plentiful supply. 15,500 for the sellers, 13,300 for the buyers. And then I'm gonna try and get that. You do need to go down quite substantially. All right, a little bit of volatility here all of a sudden, and this is where the market starts to find itself, basically. Yep, 12,500 here, bit of speculation here and there, but it took this massive decline over the course of June to, I'm gonna say January, February, before we actually got to that point. Radiation absorption thrusters, again, very difficult to show whatever is happening in here, but very same thing, of course. Introduction here went up to 3 million ISK, and currently it's selling for 12,500 and 12,330. I also think that CCP did at some point make this stuff far more plentiful with new content, so this is also a part of the equation here, of course. As the Triglavian storyline is developed, we saw the conduits, the emerging conduits that were all of a sudden very soloable in battleships. We had the invasion content itself. All of that created new supply, and so it was very difficult, of course, to maintain any high price. At that point, we were just flooded with the stuff, and now we are here at 12,300, which will make for affordable Triglavian ships eventually as well, of course. Singularity Radiation Converter, very same pattern. Trinary state processor, again, started at 200,000 ISK and is currently going for 26,000 ISK. And then the 0 point field manipulator, finally one that has not been made too plentiful here, starts at 200,000 ISK and is still selling now for 233,000, 185,000 for the buyer. So these are basically the ones that you still want at this point. Lots of the other stuff has been basically supplied into oblivion compared to their starting points, and then the capital stuff is still, I think, in that phase. We may even see, let's see if this is unreasonable, 16 million, very expensive, 25 million, very expensive, 3.2 million, still pretty expensive, but perhaps not that crazy. If my speculation is right and they want the Triglavians to become the 5th faction in regular EVE Online, perhaps even a new player start that's possible as a Triglavian character and things like that, then you can fully expect them to come out with carriers, super carriers, titans, all of that stuff as well. And then we will see more content that will drop all of these capital ship parts as well. In order to allow for supply and demand and creation of these ships, so expect those then to start to drop off massively. Basically, if you still find any of these capital things at this point, I would try to sell them as quickly as possible, because I don't expect many of these prizes, especially here and here, to remain indefinitely. At some point, content is going to overtake everything, just as what we've seen here in a lot of these Triglavian components for the smaller non-capital ships here. Interesting suggestion, but of course here across the board you've got stuff that's far more predictable, and it's not really something that right now I would speculate on, especially because the Triglavian storyline is still in full development, and we don't know for certain, of course, what CCP is planning exactly. But the rest of this month should give us a strong indication and should be pretty cool to watch as well. And there you go, guys. That's it for this EVE Talk. Thank you very much for watching. And as always, I'll see you next time.